Hey there, friend. Welcome to another gentle journey through history's quieter corners. Whether it's the middle of the day or you're settling in for the night, I'm grateful you've chosen to spend this time wandering through the past with me. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the globe. There's something oddly comforting about knowing we're all drifting through these old stories together, scattered across different time zones, but united in our curiosity about how life once was. If this kind of slow, thoughtful storytelling helps you unwind, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it genuinely brings you peace. We have many more stories waiting in history's shadows, ready to lull us into quieter thoughts. Now settle in, pull that blanket a little closer. Let the day's worries fade like morning mist. Tonight, we're stepping back 700 years, not into the grand halls of kings or the cloistered walls of monasteries, but onto the muddy streets where survival was an art form and dignity was a luxury few could afford. Imagine, if you will, waking not to an alarm clock or the gentle nudge of sunlight through your bedroom window, but to the sharp bite of November frost seeping through the thin wool cloak that serves as your only blanket. Your bed is not a bed at all, but a shallow depression you've scraped behind the baker's shop, where the dying embers of the ovens offer just enough warmth to keep the cold from claiming you in your sleep. This is your life now. This is what it means to be homeless in medieval times, when charity was sparse, work was scarce, and the line between survival and starvation was as thin as the morning ice forming in the water troughs. The bells of the cathedral have not yet rung for lauds, that first prayer of the day that marks the stirring of the city. But you're already awake, because sleep, real sleep, is a luxury you can't afford. Every sound could mean danger. Every footstep might belong to the city watch, ready to move you along with the flat of a sword or the toe of a boot. Every shadow could hide someone desperate enough to kill for the few copper coins sewn into your cloak's hem. You stretch, and your joints protest with the creaking of someone far older than your actual years. The cold has settled deep into your bones, that penetrating dampness that never quite leaves, no matter how close you manage to get to a fire. Your stomach growls, a hollow, echoing sound that you've learned to ignore. Though ignoring hunger doesn't make it disappear, the city is beginning to stir around you. You can hear the shuffle of feet on cobblestones, the creak of cart wheels, the distant lowing of cattle being driven to market. Soon, the streets will fill with merchants and craftsmen, housewives and servants, all of them with somewhere to go, something to do, someone who expects them. You have none of these things, and in medieval society, having no place in the great chain of being is not just unfortunate, it's suspicious. You rise carefully, brushing the worst of the dirt and straw from your clothes. These same clothes have been your second skin for months now, patched and repatched until they're more repair than original fabric. The wool has felted from wear and weather into something that barely resembles cloth, but it's what stands between you and the elements, so you treat it with the reverence of a holy relic. The first challenge of your day, as it is every day, is water. Your throat feels like parchment, and your mouth tastes of copper and desperation. But water, clean water, is not free for the taking. The well in the market square is for citizens, for those who pay taxes and rent stalls and have names that matter. For you, there's the horse trough by the inn, if you can reach it before the stable boys chase you away, or the muddy puddles where the street gutters overflow after rain. You choose the horse trough, creeping through the pre-dawn shadows like a ghost. The water is brown and filmed with hay and worse things, but it's wet, and that's what matters. You cup your hands and drink quickly, the taste of it earthy and foul but necessary. A window shutter bangs open above you, and you freeze like a hunted animal. "Away with you," comes a voice from the darkness above. "No begging here. You're not begging, merely drinking. But the distinction doesn't matter. In the eyes of those with roofs over their heads, your very existence is a form of begging, a silent plea that makes them uncomfortable, reminds them how quickly fortune can turn. You slip away into the growing light, just another shadow among shadows. The baker's apprentice is already at work, and the smell of bread, real bread, wheat bread, not the coarse barley loaves the poor eat when they eat at all, drifts through the air like a taunt. Your stomach clenches with want, but you've learned not to linger too long near the bakery. The baker's wife has a sharp tongue and a sharper stick, and she's not afraid to use either on vagrants who get too close to her wares. Instead, you turn toward the market square, where the day's commerce is beginning to unfold. This is where opportunity might present itself, where a merchant might need a strong back for an hour's work, where a dropped coin might roll unnoticed into a corner, where scraps might be discarded that could mean the difference between eating and starving. But the market square is also where danger lives. The city watch patrols here regularly, and they're not known for their gentle treatment of the homeless. Vagrancy is not just frowned upon in medieval times. It's illegal. The laws are clear. Every person must have a master, a trade, a place in society. Those who don't are vagabonds, and vagabonds are subject to punishment that ranges from public humiliation to branding to hanging, depending on the mood of the magistrate and how many times you've been caught. You've been caught twice already. Your back still bears the faint marks of the flogging from your second offence, thin white lines that pull tight when you move too quickly. A third offence might mean losing an ear or worse. The knowledge sits heavy in your chest as you approach the market, every instep a calculated risk. The merchants are setting up their stalls, their servants arranging goods with the practiced efficiency of long routine. Bolts of cloth in colours you've almost forgotten existed, deep blues and rich reds and golden yellows that seem to capture sunlight itself. Spices that make your eyes water with their potency, brought from lands so distant they might as well be fairy tales. Silver cups and brass bells and leather goods work so fine they feel like silk. All of it impossible, all of it beautiful, all of it forever beyond your reach. You position yourself near the corner where the cloth merchant's stall meets the spice seller's, close enough to seem purposeful, but far enough to avoid immediate suspicion. This is an art you've perfected over months of practice, the art of being invisible while remaining visible enough to catch opportunity when it presents itself. A well-dressed woman approaches the cloth merchant, her servant trailing behind with a purse that jingles promisingly. She's examining a bolt of green wool, running it between her fingers with the casual expertise of someone who has never wanted for anything. Her cloak is lined with fur. Real fur, not the patched rabbit skin that the slightly better off wear. This is miniver, the white winter fur of ermine, a luxury that costs more than most people see in a year. As she haggles with the merchant, and it is haggling, for even the wealthy know the value of a hard bargain, her servant grows distracted, watching a juggler who's begun performing near the fountain. The purse hangs loose at his belt, heavy with the weight of silver, and for a moment, just a moment, you imagine how easy it would be to slice the strings with the small knife hidden in your boot. But you've seen what happens to thieves. The stocks are a mercy compared to losing a hand, and losing a hand means certain death for someone in your position. Your hands are all you have left to sell, the only tools that might earn you a day's wage or a crust of bread. You force yourself to look away, to focus instead on the scraps of conversation drifting from the stalls. Prices are terrible this season, what with the harvest being so poor. Heard there's sickness in the next county, some kind of fever. The Earl's men came through yesterday, conscripting for the war in France. War. Always war. And with war comes displacement, refugees, more competition for the few opportunities available to people like you. Veterans returning broken and bitter, their soldiering days ended by wounds or age, joining the ranks of the masterless men who drift from town to town like leaves on the wind. You've been one of those leaves for 8 months now, ever since the wool merchant you worked for died of the flux and his widow sold the business rather than keep you on. 8 months of discovering just how quickly a person can fall from having a place in the world to having none at all. 8 months of learning that charity, no matter what the priests preach, is a finite resource, and that Christian love has limits that are strictly enforced. The church bells ring terse now, the 3rd hour, and the market is in full swing. You've been standing here for what feels like an eternity, but no opportunity has presented itself. No merchant has called for an extra pair of hands. No cart has gotten stuck needing someone to push. No lady has dropped her glove for you to retrieve in hopes of a copper coin. Your stomach has moved beyond growling to a kind of hollow ache that makes you light-headed. You haven't eaten since yesterday morning, when you managed to catch the scraps thrown out by the tavern keeper, a few crusts of bread soaked in ale and grease. Food that would have disgusted you in your former life but tasted like a feast after 2 days of nothing. The smell of roasting meat drifts from a cook's stall, and you find yourself moving toward it despite knowing you have nothing to trade for food. The cook is a fat man with grease-stained aprons and arms like ham hocks, turning a spit over glowing coals. The meat, pork by the smell, crackles and hisses, sending up clouds of smoke that make your mouth water and your stomach clench with desperate hunger. "What do you want?" the cook asks, not looking up from his work, but sensing your presence the way a merchant senses a customer. "Work," you say, your voice coming out rougher than you intended. "Any work." He looks at you then, taking in your patched clothes, your hollow cheeks, the way you're swaying slightly on your feet. His expression is not unkind, but it's not encouraging either. "I've got a boy already," he says, nodding toward a thin youth who's tending a smaller fire nearby. "Don't need another." "Anything," you press, though you know it's pointless. "I can carry, I can clean, I said I don't need anyone." His voice is firmer now, and you can see the moment when pity hardens into suspicion. "Move along before I call the watch." And so you move along, because you always move along, because that's what people like you do. You drift through the market like smoke, present but insubstantial, noticed only long enough to be dismissed. But as you turn away from the cook's stall, something catches your eye. A small commotion near the fountain, where a merchant's cart has overturned, spilling its contents across the cobblestones. Apples, dozens of them, rolling in every direction while the merchant and his apprentice scramble to gather them up before they're trampled by the crowd. This is opportunity, dressed in the humble garb of fruit. You move quickly but not too quickly, helping to gather the scattered apples with the studied efficiency of someone who belongs there. The merchant, red-faced and frustrated, barely glances at you as you hand him an armful of his wares. "My thanks," he mutters, then looks at you more closely. "Here, you've done me a service." He reaches into his purse and pulls out a small silver coin, pressing it into your palm. It's not much, a penny, maybe 2, but it's more than you've seen in days. More importantly, it's earned honestly, without theft or begging, or the kind of desperate measures that haunt your dreams. "Thank you, sir," you manage, and mean it more than any words you've spoken in months. The merchant nods and turns back to his cart, already forgetting you exist. But you stand there for a moment, feeling the weight of the coin in your palm, and for the first time in days, you allow yourself something that might almost be called hope. The morning is still young, and you have a coin in your pocket. It's not enough to change your life, but it's enough to buy a meal, maybe even a cup of ale to wash away the taste of horse trough water. For now, in this moment, it's enough. But even as you savour this small victory, you know it's temporary. The coin will be spent by evening, the hunger will return, and tomorrow you'll wake again behind the baker's shop, cold and desperate and invisible. This is the rhythm of your life now, measured not in days or weeks, but in small survivals, tiny victories snatched from the jaws of an indifferent world. The cathedral bells ring out again, marking the passage of time in a city that has little patience for those who exist outside its carefully ordered structure. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders and begin walking, not toward any particular destination, but simply forward, because forward is the only direction that matters when you have nowhere to go. The day stretches ahead of you, full of uncertainty and small possibilities, and you meet it the way you meet every day, with the quiet courage of someone who has learned that survival itself is a form of victory. The coin grows warm in your palm as you walk, a small circle of possibility that makes the morning seem less bleak. But warmth, you've learned, is as fleeting as fortune, and the metal cools quickly in the November air, becoming just another weight to carry. Your feet know these streets better than they knew the paths of your former life. Every alley, every doorway, every loose cobblestone that might trip an unwary step in darkness. This is your domain now, not owned, but intimately known, mapped not by property lines, but by the geography of survival. Here, the baker's wife emerges at dawn with yesterday's unsold bread. There, the tavern keeper empties his slop bucket, and sometimes edible scraps float in the murky water. The penny in your hand could buy a loaf of bread, coarse barley bread, that would sit heavy in your empty stomach and provide fuel for another day. Or it could buy a cup of ale, thin and sour but warming, something to dull the constant edge of hunger and cold. These are the mathematics of desperation, calculations no merchant or scholar ever taught, but which you've mastered through necessity. You pass a group of pilgrims gathered near the cathedral steps, their clothes marking them as travellers from distant places. They're preparing to continue their journey, shouldering packs and adjusting walking sticks, their faces bright with the particular enthusiasm of those who believe their destination holds salvation. One of them, a woman with kind eyes and work-worn hands, notices you watching and approaches. "Brother," she says, though you're clearly no monk, "are you in need?" The question catches you off guard. In your months on the streets, charity has been rare and usually comes with conditions. Work first, pray first, prove you deserve it first. But this woman simply waits, her hand already moving toward the small purse at her belt. "I am," you answer, because honesty, strangely, has become easier since losing everything else. She presses a crust of bread into your free hand, harder than the penny and worth far more in practical terms. "May God keep you safe," she murmurs, then rejoins her group as they begin filing toward the city gates. You watch them go, these people who sleep in inns and eat at tables and travel by choice rather than necessity. Once you might have been among them, or at least understood their world. Now they seem as foreign as the exotic spices in the market stalls, beautiful and distant and impossible to reach. The bread is yesterday's, maybe the day before, but it's real food from clean hands. You break off a piece and chew slowly, making it last, feeling the sustenance spread through your body like warmth from a fire. This is what kindness tastes like, you think, and wonder if you'll remember this flavour when winter deepens and charity becomes even scarcer. A commotion draws your attention back to the immediate world. Near the stocks in the market square, a crowd has gathered to watch the morning's entertainment. A man stands locked in the wooden restraints, his head and hands protruding through holes worn smooth by countless previous occupants. His crime, announced on a placard hung around his neck, was selling watered wine. The crowd pelts him with rotten vegetables and jeers, their morning boredom relieved by someone else's misfortune. You've seen this spectacle before. Been part of the crowd when you had the luxury of moral indignation. Now you recognize something different in the man's eyes. Not shame, but the dull resignation of someone who has learned that dignity is a luxury the desperate cannot afford. His clothes, beneath the filth thrown by the crowd, are patched and worn thin. This wasn't a wealthy merchant cutting corners for extra profit, but someone desperate enough to risk public humiliation for a few extra coins. The crowd begins to disperse as the novelty wears off, leaving the man alone with his punishment. You linger, not from cruelty, but from recognition. There but for fortune go you, and fortune, as you've learned, is as changeable as weather. Water. The man croaks as you pass, his voice barely audible. You look around. The crowd has moved on. The guards have returned to their other duties, and no one is watching. The horse trough is only a few steps away, its brown water suddenly looking less repulsive when measured against human need. You cup your hands, fill them with the murky liquid, and hold them to the man's lips. He drinks gratefully, desperately, water running down his chin and soaking into his already filthy shirt. "My thanks," he whispers, and you nod, understanding that gratitude between the desperate needs no elaborate words. This small act of mercy costs you nothing but time, yet it feels like the most significant thing you've done in months. In a world that has stripped away your possessions, your position, your very identity, kindness remains something you can still give. It's a discovery that surprises you with its weight. The morning progresses, and the city settles into its daily rhythm. Merchants hawk their wares with voices trained to carry over the general din. Craftsmen bend over their work, creating things of beauty and utility that will outlast their makers. Housewives negotiate prices with the skill of seasoned diplomats. Children dart between the stalls like schools of fish, quick and bright and full of energy that seems impossible from your current perspective. You drift through it all like a ghost at a feast, present but not participating, watching but not belonging. This is perhaps the cruelest aspect of homelessness in medieval times, not just the hunger or cold or danger, but the gradual erasure of your humanity in the eyes of others. You become part of the landscape, like the worn stones of the streets or the weathered walls of buildings, noticed only when you're in the way. Near the cathedral, a priest is distributing alms to a line of beggars and desperate souls. The queue moves slowly, each supplicant required to recite prayers and submit to a brief lecture on the virtues of honest work before receiving their pittance. You consider joining the line, but something holds you back. Perhaps it's pride, that last stubborn ember of your former self, or perhaps it's the knowledge that charity given grudgingly tastes bitter, no matter how hungry you are. Instead, you find yourself drawn to the cathedral itself, its massive doors standing open to welcome the faithful. Inside, the space soars upward into shadows, lit by candles that flicker like captured stars. The air smells of incense and old stone and the accumulated prayers of centuries. Here at least you are not unwelcome. The church may preach selective charity, but its doors remain open to all who seek sanctuary. You slip inside, keeping to the shadows near the back, where your presence will draw less attention. A few other souls kneel in prayer, their whispered words echoing softly in the vast space. An old woman clutches a rosary, her lips moving in silent supplication. A young man, well-dressed but hollow-eyed, stares at the crucifix with the intensity of someone seeking answers to impossible questions. For a moment, you allow yourself to simply be still, not watching for opportunities or threats, not calculating your next move or rationing your energy, just existing in this space where your lack of coin or status doesn't matter, where the God they preach about supposedly sees all souls as equal. The peace doesn't last long. A priest approaches, his robes rustling softly against the stone floor. His expression is not unkind, but it carries the practiced wariness of someone who has dealt with many desperate souls. "My son," he says quietly, "do you seek to pray?" It's a gentle way of asking your business, of determining whether you belong here or are simply seeking shelter. You nod, not trusting your voice, and he seems satisfied with this response. "Then pray," he says simply, and moves on to check on the other worshippers. You kneel on the cold stone, your knees protesting the familiar discomfort. Prayer, you've discovered, becomes more honest when stripped of everything else. No elaborate words, no formal requests for advancement or prosperity. Just the raw plea of a soul reduced to its essence. Help me survive another day. Help me remain human in a world that treats me as less than human. Help me find meaning in this existence that seems to have no purpose beyond the next meal, the next safe place to sleep. The cathedral bells mark the passing of another hour, and you know you cannot linger much longer. The priest's tolerance has limits, and you've learned to leave before those limits are tested. But for these few minutes, you've found something approaching peace, and that too is a form of sustenance. As you rise to leave, the old woman with the rosary catches your eye. She's been watching you, and now she approaches with the careful steps of someone whose bones carry decades of wear. "Here," she whispers, pressing something into your hand. It's another coin, smaller than the penny from the merchant, but still precious beyond measure. For a candle. Light one for both of us. You want to refuse, to tell her you're not that desperate, but the words die in your throat. Because you are that desperate, and her kindness deserves honesty, not pride. You accept the coin with a nod of gratitude that encompasses more than words could express. The candle you light burns steadily in its holder, one small flame among dozens but somehow distinct in your eyes. It represents more than prayer now. It's a beacon of human connection in a world that has taught you to expect isolation. As you watch it flicker, you understand that survival isn't just about finding food and shelter. It's about maintaining the connections that make you human, even when humanity seems like a luxury you can't afford. The afternoon stretches ahead, bringing new challenges and small possibilities. Your stomach still aches with hunger, your clothes are still damp with morning frost, and night will come with its familiar dangers. But you have 2 coins now instead of none, bread in your belly instead of emptiness, and the memory of kindness received and given. In the mathematics of medieval homelessness, these small additions might mean the difference between survival and surrender. And so you step back into the daylight, ready to face whatever the remaining hours might bring, carrying with you the knowledge that even in the darkest circumstances, human dignity can endure. The city continues its ancient rhythm around you, indifferent to your struggles but unable to completely erase your presence. You are still here, still breathing, still hoping. And for now, that has to be enough. The afternoon sun climbs higher, but its warmth feels thin and distant, like a promise someone forgot to keep. You emerge from the cathedral's sheltering darkness into light that seems almost harsh after the gentle flicker of candles. The world reasserts itself immediately. The clatter of cartwheels on stone, the calls of merchants, the endless bustle of people who have places to be and purposes to fulfill. Your 2 coins feel heavier now, weighted with possibility and responsibility. 2 small circles of metal that represent choices, each one carrying consequences that ripple through the fragile architecture of survival. Spend them too quickly, and tonight brings the familiar gnaw of emptiness. Hoard them too carefully, and you might collapse before evening from hunger and cold. You drift toward the area near the city gates, where travelers arrive dusty and tired from the roads. This is sometimes fertile ground for opportunity. Horses that need holding while riders conduct business. Bags that need carrying. Messages that need delivering to addresses within the city walls. The work is sporadic and the pay minimal, but it requires no guild membership, no references from previous masters, no proof that you belong anywhere in particular. A merchant's wagon rumbles through the gates, its wheels caked with mud from country roads. The driver looks exhausted, his shoulders set with the particular weariness of someone who has spent days navigating rutted tracks and suspicious villages. Behind him, the wagon sags under carefully tied bundles, cloth perhaps, or grain, or those mysterious goods that travel from market to market in search of profit. You approach carefully, reading his face for signs of receptiveness or irritation. Some merchants welcome help. Others view any offer of assistance as the first move in an elaborate theft. This one glances at you with eyes that have seen too many desperate souls to be particularly moved by one more. Need someone to watch your wagon while you conduct business? You offer, keeping your voice steady and respectful. He considers this, weighing the risk of trusting a stranger against the convenience of not having to drag his goods through the crowded streets to whatever inn or warehouse awaits him. Can you be trusted? He asks. Which is both a reasonable question and an impossible one. Trust, after all, is something earned over time, and time is a luxury neither of you can afford. I can, you say simply, because what else is there to say? Your appearance speaks against you, the patched clothes, the hollow cheeks, the indefinable air of desperation that clings to the homeless like morning mist. But sometimes honesty carries its own weight. He studies you for a long moment, then nods toward his wagon. Touch, nothing. Move, nothing. If anyone approaches, you call for me. I'll be in the grain merchant's stall. He points toward a corner of the market where sacks of barley and wheat create small golden mountains. 2 hours, no more. He doesn't mention payment, which means either he's forgotten or he's testing to see if you'll ask. You don't ask. Experience has taught you that desperation makes poor negotiation, and appearing too eager for coin only confirms what people already suspect about your circumstances. The merchant disappears into the crowd, leaving you alone with his wagon and its mysterious cargo. This is a strange form of employment, being paid to do nothing. But doing nothing effectively requires a particular kind of skill. You must appear alert enough to deter casual thieves, but not so vigilant as to make honest customers uncomfortable. You must be present enough to fulfill your duty, but invisible enough not to embarrass the merchant who hired you. Time moves differently when you're standing guard. Each minute stretches like warm honey, marked by the cathedral bells that divide the day into manageable portions. You watch the flow of people, servants hurrying on errands, children playing elaborate games that make perfect sense to them and none to adults, beggars positioning themselves strategically near the entrances to shops where charity might be dispensed. One of these beggars catches your attention, not because he's particularly different from the others, but because you recognize something of yourself in his careful positioning, his practiced invisibility. He's younger than you, perhaps barely past boyhood, but his eyes carry the particular wariness of someone who has learned that the world is not kind to those without protection. He approaches the wagon with the casual gait of someone who belongs nowhere in particular, and you tense, ready to call out as instructed. But instead of reaching for anything, he simply nods in your direction. Keeping watch? He asks, though the answer is obvious. For now, you reply, uncertain whether this is friendly conversation or reconnaissance for some future theft. Good spot, he observes, gesturing toward the steady stream of potential customers flowing past. Better than most. There's something in his tone that suggests experience, and you realize he's not evaluating the wagon as a target, but as a workplace. He's been where you are, perhaps recently, and understands the delicate balance of temporary employment and permanent desperation. The merchant seems fair, you offer, which is more hope than assessment, but feels like something worth saying. The boy nods. Fair enough. Paid me yesterday to carry messages to 3 different workshops. Didn't ask too many questions about why I knew the streets so well. This is valuable intelligence, the kind of information that flows between the homeless like water, finding its level. A merchant who pays promptly and doesn't interrogate his temporary help is worth remembering, worth recommending to others who share your circumstances. I'm Thomas, the boy says, though names among the homeless are often fluid things, adopted and discarded as circumstances require. William, you reply, choosing one of several names you've used in recent months. Your real name feels too precious to share casually, too connected to the person you used to be before the world shifted beneath your feet. Thomas settles against a nearby wall, not close enough to interfere with your duties, but near enough for conversation. This is another skill of survival, the ability to create temporary community, brief connections that provide human contact without the vulnerability of deeper friendship. How long? He asks, and you know he means how long since you had a roof, a master, a place in the ordered world that makes sense to those who've never lost their footing. 8 months, you answer. You? 2 years, near enough. He says it without self-pity, as a simple statement of fact. Started when my father died, and the Lord wouldn't let me inherit the cottage. Said I was too young to work the land properly. This is a common story. The way the medieval world's careful hierarchies can collapse without warning. A death, an illness, a bad harvest, a Lord's whim. Any of these can transform a person from productive member of society to burden to be disposed of. The distance between security and destitution is measured not in miles, but in heartbeats. Do you ever think about leaving? You ask, gesturing toward the city gates where the road leads to other places, other possibilities. Thomas shrugs. Where would I go? Cities are all the same for people like us. At least here I know which merchants might hire me, which corners are safe to sleep in, which guards will move you along gently, and which ones use their boots for emphasis. This is the terrible logic of homelessness, that even misery becomes familiar, and familiar misery feels safer than unknown possibilities. The devil you know, as they say, though in your case the devil is hunger and cold, and the constant fear of discovery by authorities who view your very existence as a crime against the natural order. The merchant returns earlier than promised, which is either good news or bad news depending on how his business concluded. His face is neutral, giving nothing away, but he nods approvingly when he sees his wagon untouched and properly guarded. Well done, he says, reaching into his purse. He produces a coin, not silver like your morning's earnings, but copper, still warm from his palm. If I return this way, I'll remember you. This is high praise in the economy of temporary employment. To be remembered favourably by someone who might return, who might have future work, is worth more than the immediate payment. It's the beginning of something that might almost be called reputation. Though reputation among the desperate is a fragile thing. Thomas watches this transaction with professional interest, noting the merchant's face, his manner, the way he handles payment. This too is education. The informal curriculum of survival that no university teaches, but which determines whether you eat tonight or go hungry. The merchant departs with his wagon, leaving you with 3 coins instead of 2, and the faint possibility that fortune might be turning, however slightly, in your direction. It's not prosperity. You're still homeless, still hungry, still wearing clothes that mark you as someone society would prefer to ignore. But it's something, and something is infinitely better than nothing when nothing has been your constant companion. Buy you a cup of ale? Thomas suggests, and you realise that this too is part of survival, the recognition that small celebrations, shared victories, help maintain the human connections that keep despair at bay. You consider your 3 coins, calculating the cost of ale against the cost of food, the value of companionship against the requirements of the flesh. It's a complex equation with no clear answer, but sometimes the heart's mathematics matter more than the stomach's accounting. 1 cup, you agree, because loneliness is its own form of hunger, and sometimes feeding the soul takes precedence over feeding the body. The tavern Thomas leads you to is not the sort of establishment that caters to merchants and craftsmen. It's a place where ale is weak and cheap, where questions are not asked about your circumstances or the state of your clothes. The interior is dim and smoky, lit by tallow candles that sputter and hiss, filling the air with the acrid scent of burning fat. The customers are people like yourselves, day labourers whose work has ended, beggars who've managed to collect enough coins for temporary respite, women whose circumstances you prefer not to examine too closely. This is democracy of a sort, the equality that comes from shared desperation. The ale, when it arrives, is thin and sour, more water than grain, but it's warm and it burns away the taste of horse trough water. You and Thomas sit in comfortable silence, watching the other patrons and listening to conversations that drift like smoke through the heavy air. Heard there's work in the next county building defences. Winter's coming early this year, mark my words. The Earl's tax collectors came through yesterday, took everything that wasn't nailed down. These fragments of conversation are valuable intelligence, pieces of information that might determine where to seek work, when to expect increased competition for resources, which areas to avoid when authority turns its attention to inconvenient populations. The warmth of the tavern, combined with the ale and the rare comfort of human companionship, creates a dangerous sense of well-being. For a few moments you almost forget that this is temporary, that when you finish your drink you'll return to the streets, to the constant vigilance that survival requires. But temporary comfort is still comfort, and you've learned to accept what little the world offers without demanding more. The ale settles warm in your stomach. The conversation flows easily with Thomas, and for this brief space of time, you remember what it feels like to be human, rather than merely surviving. Outside, the afternoon light is beginning to slant toward evening, and you know that soon you'll need to consider where to spend the night, how to stretch your remaining coins through tomorrow, what opportunities the fading day might still offer. But for now, in this dim tavern with its questionable ale and its democratic acceptance of desperate circumstances, you allow yourself to simply be. Not homeless William, or vagrant William, or criminal William in the eyes of the law, but simply a person sharing a drink with another person, connected by circumstances neither of you chose, but both of you endure. The cathedral bells ring again outside, marking another hour's passage, and you raise your cup in a silent toast to survival itself. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new hungers, new fears. But today somehow you've managed to find work, earn coins, share kindness, and remember what it means to be human. In the mathematics of medieval homelessness, that's not just success, it's victory. It's the warmth of the tavern begins to feel like a memory even before you've finished your ale. Through the grimy window, you can see the light changing, taking on that particular quality that means evening is approaching with its familiar cargo of uncertainty. The other patrons seem to sense it too. Conversations become more urgent. People begin settling their debts and gathering their few possessions, preparing for the nightly dispersal that scatters the desperate like seeds on barren ground. Thomas drains his cup and sets it down with the careful precision of someone who knows this small luxury must end. "Best be moving," he says, though neither of you is eager to leave this pocket of warmth and acceptance. The watch changes at sunset, and the new guards are less understanding, so you nod, understanding the code. Some authorities view homelessness as a moral failing to be corrected with compassion, however grudging. Others see it as a crime to be punished with whatever tools come to hand. Night shifts often attract the latter sort, men who enjoy the power that darkness gives them over those who have nowhere to hide. The tavern keeper, a woman whose face carries the particular weariness of someone who's seen too much human desperation, doesn't hurry you toward the door but doesn't encourage lingering either. This is business after all, and business requires turnover, fresh coins to replace the ones already counted and stored away. You step back into the cooling air, and the contrast hits you like a physical blow. The tavern's warmth had been an illusion of security, and now reality reasserts itself with the sharp teeth of November wind. Your 3 coins, now reduced to 2 after the ale, feel smaller in your palm, their weight diminished by the approaching night. "Where do you shelter?" Thomas asks, though the question carries an undertone of caution. Information about safe sleeping places is valuable currency among the homeless, not to be shared lightly with those whose trustworthiness hasn't been established through time and repeated contact. "Behind the baker's shop," you answer, because he's shared his ale and his conversation, and reciprocity is one of the few social contracts that still applies to people in your circumstances. The ovens keep some warmth in the stones until morning. He nods approvingly. Good spot. I tried there once, but the baker's wife has a dog that doesn't fancy strangers. Had to find elsewhere. He pauses, seeming to weigh his words. There's a place near the tannery, if you ever need another option. Smells terrible, but the tanners work late and the watchmen avoid the area. This exchange of intelligence feels almost formal, like merchants discussing trade routes or scholars sharing research. In the world of medieval homelessness, knowledge of safe shelter is more valuable than silver because silver can't keep you from freezing to death in your sleep. The market square is beginning to empty as merchants pack their unsold goods and sweep their stalls clean for tomorrow's commerce. You watch this nightly ritual with the attention of someone who understands that other people's routines create patterns, and patterns create opportunities. The cloth merchant always leaves a few scraps behind, not valuable enough to pack, but potentially useful for patching clothes or stuffing into shoes for extra warmth. The baker's apprentice sometimes drops crumbs that, while not appetizing, are still technically food. There, Thomas says quietly, nodding toward a figure near the fountain. New arrival. You follow his gaze and see what he means. A woman middle-aged but worn beyond her years, sitting with the particular stillness of someone who has nowhere to go and no idea how to proceed. Her clothes mark her as recently fallen, patched but not yet threadbare, dirty but not yet ground into the fabric like a permanent stain. She clutches a small bundle that probably contains everything she owns in the world, and her eyes have the wide, frightened look of someone still adjusting to the reality of her new circumstances. How long do you think? You ask, though you already know the answer. Everyone who's lived on the streets develops the ability to read desperation in others, to calculate how recently someone's world collapsed by the angle of their shoulders, the condition of their clothes, the way they hold themselves. Days, not weeks, Thomas replies. Still has hope. You can see it in the way she keeps looking toward the cathedral, like she expects someone to emerge with solutions. This is the cruelest stage of homelessness, not the grinding desperation that comes later, but the initial shock of discovering that the world has no safety net, no system designed to catch those who fall through the cracks of medieval society. Hope, in these circumstances, is almost worse than despair because it prevents the kind of adaptation necessary for survival. You find yourself walking toward her, though you're not sure why. Perhaps it's memory of your own first nights on the streets, when every sound seemed like a threat and every shadow might hide danger. Perhaps it's simply that kindness, once awakened, tends to perpetuate itself in small ways. Sister, you say quietly as you approach, using the term not from religious conviction but from the democracy of shared suffering. Are you well? She looks up, and you see tears tracking through the dirt on her cheeks. Her face carries the soft features of someone who has never known real hardship until now, and you wonder what catastrophe has brought her to this fountain at evening's approach. I don't know what to do, she says, and the honesty in her voice cuts through the careful defenses you've built around your own emotions. My husband died 3 days ago, and the landlord, he said I couldn't stay without a man to pay the rent. He gave me until sunrise to leave, and I have nowhere. This story, like Thomas's, follows patterns you've learned to recognize. Medieval society has no place for women without male protection, no systems to support those who fall outside the carefully structured hierarchy of husband, father, master, lord. A woman alone is an anomaly, a problem to be solved by removal rather than assistance. Have you eaten today? You ask, though her hollow cheeks already provide the answer. She shakes her head, and you find yourself reaching for one of your 2 remaining coins before conscious thought can intervene. It's madness. You need every copper for your own survival. But something in her face reminds you that humanity is measured not by what we keep, but by what we give when giving costs us dearly. There's a baker near the east gate, you tell her, pressing the coin into her palm. Tell him William sent you. He might have day-old bread he's willing to sell cheap. She stares at the coin as if it's some magical artifact, then looks up at you with eyes that hold more gratitude than you've seen directed toward yourself in months. Why? She asks, and it's a reasonable question. Why would someone who clearly has nothing give away part of that nothing to a stranger? Because someone did the same for me once, you answer, though you're not sure that's entirely true. And because tomorrow, if fortune turns, maybe someone will do the same for you when you meet another person sitting by this fountain. Thomas watches this exchange with the professional interest of someone evaluating a business transaction, but there's approval in his eyes. In the economy of survival, kindness is both luxury and necessity. Luxury because you can rarely afford it. Necessity because without it, you stop being human and become merely another predator fighting over scraps. The woman rises, clutching her bundle and your coin, and disappears into the gathering dusk with the quick steps of someone who has remembered she has purpose, however temporary. You watch her go and feel the particular emptiness that comes from performing charity you can't afford, combined with the strange warmth that accompanies doing something right in a world that seems designed to make rightness impossible. That was either very wise or very foolish, Thomas observes. Probably both, you admit, fingering your single remaining coin. But I've been where she is, 3 days into homelessness, still believing someone will fix it for you. The cathedral bells mark another hour's passage, and the market square continues its evening transformation. Soon, the space that buzzed with commerce will become territory disputed between the watch and those who have nowhere else to go. The fountain where the woman sat will be claimed by others seeking rest, and the cycle will continue, desperation flowing like water, always seeking the lowest level. You and Thomas begin walking, not toward any particular destination, but simply moving, because movement feels safer than stillness. This is another skill of survival, the ability to seem purposeful even when you have no purpose, to appear as if you belong somewhere even when you belong nowhere. Winter's coming, Thomas says, though the observation is unnecessary. You can feel it in the wind, see it in the way people hurry through their business, sense it in the particular quality of light that promises shorter days and longer nights. Winter is the enemy of the homeless, the season when mere discomfort becomes mortal danger. I've been thinking about that, you reply, though thinking is perhaps too generous a term for the constant low-level anxiety that accompanies any consideration of the months ahead. The monasteries sometimes take in travellers during the worst weather. If you can prove you're travelling, Thomas points out, and if they have room, and if they believe you're not just seeking free shelter for the season, these are the calculations that occupy your mind as the city settles into evening routine. Every option comes with conditions. Every possibility carries risks. Every choice might be the difference between survival and becoming another body found frozen in an alley come spring. The baker's shop comes into view, its windows glowing warmly in the gathering darkness. Soon, the ovens will bank their fires for the night, but the stones will hold heat for hours, creating the small pocket of warmth that has become your refuge. It's not much, a space barely large enough to lie down, sheltered from direct wind but open to rain and snow. But it's yours by right of discovery and occupation, and in the world of medieval homelessness, even the smallest territory feels precious. This is where we part ways, you tell Thomas, though the words feel heavier than they should. Human connection, you've learned, becomes more valuable when it's rare. May the morning find you well, he replies, which is both farewell and blessing in the vocabulary of the desperate. You watch him disappear into the maze of narrow streets that lead toward the tannery district, then turn toward your own shelter. The baker's wife is visible through the window, cleaning her counters and preparing for tomorrow's work. She's never acknowledged your presence behind her shop, But neither has she called the watch, which in the mathematics of survival counts as acceptance. The space behind the bakery is exactly as you left it, a depression in the hard-packed earth, sheltered by the building's overhang and warmed by the proximity of the ovens. Your few possessions, hidden beneath a loose stone, remain undisturbed. A spare shirt, more holes than fabric, but still capable of providing an extra layer. A small knife, dull but sharp enough to cut bread or defend against rats. A piece of flint and steel, wrapped in oiled cloth, worth more than silver, because fire means the difference between cold and warmth, raw food and cooked. You settle into your shallow bed, pulling your cloak tight around your shoulders and arranging your body to maximize warmth retention. This is a skill learned through necessity, how to sleep in positions that conserve heat, how to wake at the first sign of danger, how to rest without ever truly relaxing vigilance. The baker's ovens radiate their stored heat through the stone wall, and you press your back against the rough surface, feeling the warmth seep through your clothes and into your bones. It's not comfort. Comfort is a memory from your former life, but it's the absence of immediate suffering, which has become your definition of contentment. Above you, stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, distant and cold, but somehow reassuring in their permanence. You've learned to read them not as romantic symbols, but as practical tools. Navigation aids for those who must sometimes move through darkness, timepieces for those who can't afford candles to mark the hours. Your stomach reminds you that the bread from this morning was your only meal, but you force yourself to ignore its complaints. The single coin in your pocket could buy food, but tomorrow will bring new hunger, and tomorrow you might not find work or kindness or any of the small miracles that made today survivable. Better to sleep hungry and wake with possibilities than to sleep fed and wake with nothing. The city around you settles into its evening rhythm. Somewhere, merchants count their profits in warm rooms above their shops. Craftsmen sit by their fires, surrounded by family and the tools of their trades. Priests prepare for evening prayers in chambers that never know cold or want. And scattered through the shadows, people like you arrange themselves in doorways and alleys and forgotten corners, making themselves as small and quiet as possible in hopes that dawn will find them still breathing. This is the truth about medieval homelessness that the comfortable prefer not to acknowledge, that survival itself is an achievement, that making it through another night is a victory worth celebrating, that maintaining humanity in the face of systematic dehumanization requires a kind of courage that heroes in songs never need to demonstrate. You close your eyes, though sleep will be light and fitful, interrupted by every sound that might signal danger. But you're alive, you're sheltered after a fashion, and tomorrow will bring new possibilities for work, for kindness, for the small miracles that keep hope alive in even the most desperate circumstances. The baker's ovens tick and creak as they cool, and you match your breathing to their rhythm, letting the sound become a lullaby of sorts. Somewhere in the distance, the cathedral bells mark another hour's passage, measuring time that moves differently when you're counting not days or weeks, but breaths, heartbeats, moments of warmth stolen from an indifferent world. Your last conscious thought is of the woman by the fountain, and you hope she found the baker, found bread, found some small measure of the kindness that makes survival bearable. Tomorrow, if you're fortunate, you'll see Thomas again, perhaps find work again, perhaps perform some small act of grace that reminds you why staying human matters even when humanity seems like a luxury you can't afford. The night settles around you like a familiar enemy, cold and potentially dangerous, but no longer unknown. You've learned its rhythms, its threats, its occasional mercies, and you've learned that sometimes, just sometimes, even the most desperate circumstances can't entirely extinguish the light that makes us human. In the darkness behind the baker's shop, pressed against warm stones and wrapped in threadbare wool, You sleep the careful sleep of those who must always be ready to run, to hide, to fight for the right to exist in a world that would prefer to pretend people like you don't exist at all. But you do exist, you endure, and that, in the harsh mathematics of medieval survival, is perhaps the greatest victory of all. The stones beneath your back grow cooler as the night deepens, their stored warmth seeping away like hope through cupped fingers. You've learned to measure time not by bells or stars, but by the gradual retreat of heat from the baker's ovens, each degree of cooling marking another hour survived in the endless arithmetic of staying alive. Sleep, when it comes, arrives in fragments. Your body has adapted to this shallow rest, never quite surrendering to unconsciousness because unconsciousness means vulnerability, and vulnerability means death. Instead, you drift in that grey space between waking and sleeping, aware enough to hear footsteps on cobblestones, alert enough to distinguish between the stumbling gait of a drunk and the purposeful stride of someone with darker intentions. Around midnight, you're pulled fully awake by voices, low, urgent, carrying the particular tension that means trouble. Through the gap between buildings, you glimpse shadows moving in the market square. 3 figures, perhaps 4, their movements too coordinated to be casual, too quiet to be innocent. You press yourself deeper into your shallow depression, making yourself as small and still as possible. This is another survival skill, the ability to become invisible not through magic, but through absolute stillness, through breathing so quietly that even your own heartbeat seems loud in your ears. The voices grow closer, and you catch fragments of conversation that make your blood run cold. Saw him counting coins earlier. Sleeps behind the grain merchant's stall. Won't be missed if he doesn't wake up. They're hunting. Not for sport or passion, but with the methodical efficiency of predators who understand that some prey is easier than others. The homeless make perfect victims. No one to miss them. No one to investigate their disappearance. No one to care if they simply vanish between sunset and dawn. The footsteps pass your hiding place, moving toward the eastern edge of the market where Thomas mentioned seeing another rough sleeper earlier in the day. You want to call out, to warn whoever they're stalking, but your voice would only mark you as another target. This is the terrible mathematics of survival. Sometimes staying alive means allowing others to die. Minutes stretch like hours before the footsteps return, moving more quickly now, carrying satisfaction in their rhythm. You don't hear screams, which might mean they were efficient, or might mean their victim never woke up. In the morning, someone will find a body, and the city watch will make perfunctory notes about another vagrant who succumbed to the cold. Case closed before it's opened. You lie in the darkness, listening to your own breathing and trying not to think about how easily those footsteps might have turned toward your corner, how thin the line is between being the hunter and being the prey. This is what they don't tell you about homelessness. That the cold and hunger are manageable compared to the constant fear. The knowledge that you exist outside society's protection and therefore outside its concern. Dawn feels impossibly distant, but you know it will come. It always comes, carrying with it the illusion of safety that daylight provides. During the day, you're merely poor, merely unfortunate, but darkness transforms you into something else, a shadow person, a creature that exists in the spaces between society's carefully ordered structures. The cathedral bells mark another hour, their bronze voices carrying across the sleeping city like prayers made audible. You count the strikes, 3 bells, which means you've survived half the night. 3 more hours until the first grey light begins to creep across the eastern walls. 6 more until the city truly wakes, and you can emerge from hiding. Your stomach has moved beyond hunger into a kind of hollow ache that makes you dizzy when you shift position. The single coin in your pocket seems to pulse with possibility, but you resist the temptation to seek food now. Night markets exist, but they cater to people whose business doesn't bear scrutiny, and involving yourself in their transactions could lead to complications you can't afford. Instead, you close your eyes and try to remember warmth. Not the fading heat of the baker's stones, but real warmth. Sitting by a proper fire in a room with walls and a roof, wearing clothes that fit properly, eating food from plates instead of scrounging for scraps. The memories feel like stories someone told you once, beautiful but unreal. A cat appears from nowhere, picking its way delicately across the frost-slicked stones. It pauses near your hiding place, yellow eyes reflecting what little starlight penetrates the narrow space between buildings. For a moment, you and the cat regard each other with mutual recognition. Both of you creatures existing on the margins, both adapted to a life of constant vigilance. The cat moves on, disappearing into shadows with the fluid grace of something that belongs everywhere and nowhere. You envy its self-sufficiency, its ability to find food and shelter without depending on human charity or human cruelty. Cats don't need to worry about being moved along by guards or questioned about their right to exist. Time crawls forward with the reluctance of something wounded. You measure its passage by the changing quality of darkness, the way deep black gradually gives way to charcoal grey, then to the faintest hint of approaching dawn. Your body has become a clock of sorts, calibrated by months of sleeping rough to recognize the subtle shifts that mark night's retreat. 4 bells. 5. The darkness begins to thin at the edges, and you know you've survived another night. This knowledge brings no celebration, only a weary satisfaction, and the certain knowledge that tonight you'll face the same struggle, the same fears, the same delicate balance between visibility and invisibility that keeps you alive. The baker's apprentice arrives before full dawn, as he does every morning, his footsteps heavy with sleep but purposeful. You hear him fumbling with keys, muttering complaints about the cold, beginning the daily ritual of stoking fires and mixing dough. Soon, the ovens will roar back to life, and warmth will return to the stones against your back. But you can't linger to enjoy it. Dawn means movement, the daily migration of the homeless away from their sleeping places before the city fully wakes and begins to notice their presence. To be found sleeping rough is to invite questions, and questions lead to consequences that range from public humiliation to imprisonment to worse things that happen in the cells beneath the City Watch's headquarters. You gather your few possessions with practiced efficiency, hiding them again beneath the loose stone where they'll wait for your return. The knife goes into your boot, the flint and steel into the pouch sewn inside your cloak. These simple tools represent the difference between survival and surrender, though their presence also marks you as potentially dangerous in the eyes of authority. The streets are empty except for servants beginning their early errands, and merchants preparing for another day of commerce. You slip between the shadows like smoke, visible enough to avoid suspicion, but unremarkable enough to escape attention. This too is a learned skill, the art of moving through the world without seeming to disturb its surface. Near the cathedral, you encounter the first beggars of the day, positioning themselves strategically for the morning distribution of alms. They nod in recognition, not friendship exactly, but the acknowledgement that passes between those who share similar circumstances. Competition for charity is fierce, but there's also understanding that cruelty toward your own kind only makes survival harder for everyone. The woman from yesterday's fountain is not among them, and you wonder if she found shelter, if she used your coin wisely, if she's learned yet that hope is a luxury that must be rationed carefully. Part of you wants to search for her, to see if yesterday's kindness bore fruit, but you know better than to form attachments. In the world of medieval homelessness, people appear and disappear like smoke, and caring too much about their fate only adds another weight to the burden of survival. The morning air carries the scent of baking bread from a dozen shops, the smell so rich and warm It's almost possible to taste it. Your mouth waters involuntarily, and you force yourself to think of other things, of the work you might find today, of the opportunities that morning brings, of anything except the gnawing emptiness in your belly. A merchant's cart rumbles past, loaded with goods bound for some distant market. The driver looks tired but prosperous, his clothes marking him as someone who has found his place in the world's hierarchy. He doesn't see you watching from the shadows, doesn't acknowledge your existence any more than he'd notice a stray dog or a broken cobblestone. This is perhaps the cruelest aspect of homelessness, not active persecution, but the gradual erasure of your humanity in others' eyes. You drift toward the market square, hoping to repeat yesterday's success, hoping to find another merchant who needs temporary help or another opportunity to earn honest coin. The square is already showing signs of life, stalls being erected, goods being arranged, the daily theatre of commerce preparing to begin. Thomas is nowhere to be seen, which could mean many things. Perhaps he found better shelter elsewhere, perhaps he's simply approaching from a different direction. Or perhaps he was the target of last night's hunters. In the world you inhabit, people vanish without explanation, and asking too many questions only draws unwanted attention to yourself. The fountain where the woman sat yesterday is occupied by a different figure now. An old man whose clothes suggest he's been on the streets far longer than either you or Thomas. His face carries the particular blankness that comes from too many winters survived, too many humiliations endured, too many small cruelties absorbed until the soul grows numb in self-defense. He watches you approach with eyes that reveal nothing, neither welcome nor hostility. This is advanced survival, the ability to exist without triggering any response in others, to be present without being noticeable, to occupy space without claiming it. Morning, you offer quietly, testing the waters of human connection. He nods slightly, acknowledging your existence without committing to conversation. This is wise. Words create bonds, and bonds create vulnerability. Better to remain isolated than to risk the complications that come with caring about others' welfare. The cathedral bells ring the hour, and the city continues its awakening around you. Servants hurry past on errands, their quick steps marking the rhythm of lives that have purpose and direction. You envy them not for their positions. Servitude is its own form of imprisonment, but for the certainty they carry, the knowledge that they belong somewhere in the world's great structure. Your single coin grows warm in your palm as you consider the day's possibilities. It could buy bread, ale, or be saved against future need. Each choice carries consequences that ripple through the fragile architecture of survival, and making the wrong decision could mean the difference between eating today and eating tomorrow. A commotion near the city gates draws your attention. Another merchant arriving, his wagon loaded with goods that catch the morning light like promises. This could be opportunity, another chance to earn honest wages through honest work. You begin walking toward the disturbance, hope and desperation warring in your chest like competing prayers. The wheel has turned again, bringing another day with its cargo of possibility and peril. You've survived the night, dodged the hunters, endured the cold and the fear and the hollow ache of hunger. Now comes the harder task, surviving the day, finding work, maintaining the delicate balance that keeps you human in a world designed to strip away humanity one small defeat at a time. But you're still here, still breathing, still capable of kindness and hope despite everything the world has taught you about the futility of both. And perhaps, in the end, that stubborn persistence is the greatest victory of all. Not just staying alive, but staying human, staying connected to the light that makes existence more than mere survival. The morning light grows stronger, burning away the shadows that provided last night's shelter. Soon, the city will be fully awake, and you'll need to find your place in another day's careful choreography of survival. But for now, In this moment between night and day, you allow yourself to feel something that might almost be called hope. After all, you've made it this far, and making it this far in the harsh mathematics of medieval homelessness is no small miracle. The merchant's wagon that caught your attention proves to be a disappointment wrapped in morning optimism. By the time you reach the gates, he's already secured help from two sturdy young men who arrived before you, their quicker legs and sharper elbows earning them the work you'd hoped to claim. They load and unload with the efficient rhythm of those who eat regularly, their movements sharp where yours have grown cautious and measured. You watch from a respectful distance as coins change hands, trying not to let envy poison what little hope the morning has offered. Envy is a luxury you can't afford. It clouds judgment, creates bitterness, and bitterness makes you careless. Careless people don't survive long on medieval streets. The rejected merchant glances in your direction with something that might be sympathy, but sympathy doesn't buy bread. He climbs back onto his wagon and disappears into the flow of morning traffic, leaving you with the familiar taste of almost opportunity souring in your mouth. Hard luck, comes a voice behind you. You turn to find Thomas approaching, his face carrying the particular pallor that suggests a night spent in less comfortable circumstances than your warm stones. Relief floods through you. He's alive, unharmed, not among whatever casualties last night's hunters might have claimed. Thought you might have found trouble, you say, keeping your voice low. In public spaces, conversations between the homeless draw attention, and attention is rarely welcome. Different kind of trouble, he replies with a grimace. Rats in my usual spot. Big ones, bold enough to think I was trespassing on their territory. Had to find elsewhere, and elsewhere turned out to be a doorway that leaked like a broken bucket. This is the constant challenge of rough sleeping. Even when you find shelter, that shelter comes with its own complications. Rats, as Thomas discovered, are territorial creatures with sharp teeth and no respect for human desperation. Rain finds ways through coverings you thought were waterproof. Wind whistles through gaps that seemed insignificant during daylight's warmer hours. Heard voices in the night, you mention carefully. Watching his reaction, his face darkens. I heard the same. Found what was left this morning. Old Henrik used to sleep behind the grain merchant's place. Won't be sleeping anywhere now. The news hits you like cold water. Henrik, you'd seen him around the market, never spoken to him directly, but recognized him as part of the invisible community that exists in the spaces between society's attention. Now he's gone, reduced to a problem for the city's undertakers and a cautionary tale for those who remain. Quick work, Thomas continues, his voice carrying the flat tone people use when discussing horrors they can't afford to feel too deeply. Clean, professional, not robbers looking for easy coin. Someone who kills because killing is their trade. This distinction matters more than it might seem. Random violence from desperate thieves is one kind of danger. Terrible but understandable, motivated by needs you recognize. Professional killing suggests something else entirely. Something that turns murder into commerce and makes every shadow a potential threat. Why Henrik? You ask, though you suspect you already know the answer. Been asking questions lately, wondering aloud about why so many of us disappear during winter months, where the bodies go. Who profits when inconvenient people stop being inconvenient? Thomas shrugs, but there's tension in his shoulders. Some questions are safer, left unasked. The implication settles between you like fog, that the deaths aren't random, that someone benefits from the gradual reduction of the homeless population, that Henrik's curiosity made him dangerous to interests larger and more powerful than individual greed. In medieval society, where human life has different values depending on social position, the systematic elimination of those who exist outside protection wouldn't require elaborate justification. We should move, Thomas says, glancing around the market square with new wariness. Standing still makes us easy to count, easy to target. You nod, understanding the logic. Movement creates the illusion of purpose, makes you harder to categorize as purely homeless. Two men walking together might be laborers seeking work, travelers passing through, messengers on errands. Two men standing and talking in low voices about murdered vagrants are clearly something else, something that draws the wrong kind of attention. You begin walking without discussing destination, letting your feet carry you through streets that have become as familiar as the lines on your palm. Every doorway, every alley, every loose cobblestone mapped by months of careful observation. This knowledge is survival, knowing which shortcuts are safe during daylight, which areas to avoid when the watch changes shifts, where help might be found, and where it's better not to ask. Near the cathedral, morning prayers have begun, and the sound of voices raised in unison drifts through the heavy doors. There's comfort in that sound, even for those who've learned to be suspicious of organized religion's promises. The rhythm of prayer, the certainty of ritual, the suggestion that somewhere in the vast machinery of existence, patterns persist and meaning endures. Ever think about taking vows? Thomas asks, nodding toward the cathedral. Monasteries don't ask too many questions about a man's past, long as he's willing to work and pray. It's a thought that's occurred to you during the darkest moments, surrendering the struggle of independence for the security of institutional life. Monks eat regularly, sleep in proper beds, have roofs that don't leak, and walls that keep out more than wind. But monastic life also means surrendering what little freedom you've managed to retain, trading the possibility of better fortune for the certainty of regulated existence. Maybe when I'm older, you answer, though you're not sure that's true. The monastery represents safety, but safety purchased through the complete abandonment of hope feels too much like defeat. Older might come sooner than you think, living like this, Thomas observes. And there's no judgment in his voice, only the weary recognition of someone who's done the same calculations. The morning progresses with the familiar rhythm of small disappointments and smaller victories. A merchant needs a message carried to the far side of the city, payment promised but requiring trust that the promise will be kept. A tavern keeper has barrels that need moving from cellar to common room, work that pays in ale rather than coin, leaving you fed but no richer. An old woman drops a bundle of kindling and accepts help gathering it, no payment offered. But her grateful smile feels like wealth of a different kind. These fragments of employment don't add up to prosperity or even comfort, but they provide something more precious. Proof that you still have value, that your hands can still create worth, that somewhere in the vast indifference of medieval society, small spaces exist where human dignity can be earned through honest effort. By midday, your coin has grown to 3, still not enough to change your circumstances fundamentally, but sufficient to buy bread, and perhaps find shelter that doesn't require sleeping on stone. The mathematics of survival shift constantly, influenced by weather, opportunity, competition from others in similar circumstances, and the unknowable whims of those who hold power over food, shelter, and employment. The woman from yesterday's fountain appears near the baker's stall, and your heart lifts to see her looking slightly less desperate than when you'd pressed your coin into her palm. She's still obviously homeless. Her clothes carry the particular rumpled look that comes from sleeping rough, but there's colour in her cheeks and purpose in her movements that suggests she's found ways to survive her first few nights on the streets. She recognises you and approaches with the careful gratitude of someone who understands the weight of unexpected kindness. "Your baker was kind," she says quietly, "sold me bread for half what others wanted, and threw in yesterday's pastries without charge. Said anyone William recommended deserved fair treatment." This news brings unexpected warmth. Not just that your coin helped her, but that the baker remembered your name, connected it with something approaching reputation. In the world of the homeless, where identity becomes fluid and names are sometimes discarded like worn-out clothes, being remembered feels like a form of resurrection. I'm called Mary, she continues, though like most names shared among the desperate, this might be truth or convenient fiction. I wanted to thank you proper, and to say. She pauses, seeming to gather courage. I found work. Just for today, helping a merchant's wife with her washing, but she said if I do well, there might be more. This is the news you'd hope to hear, that kindness could create ripples, that one person's survival might make another's slightly more likely. Mary's face carries something that was absent yesterday by the fountain. Not hope exactly, but the absence of complete despair. It's a small victory, but small victories are the only kind available to people in your circumstances. Keep the work if you can, you tell her, and mean it more than any advice you've given in months. Regular employment is worth more than wages. It's worth having a place in the world. She nods, understanding the deeper truth in your words. Work provides more than income. It provides identity, purpose, a reason to wake each morning beyond mere survival. For those who've lost their place in society's careful hierarchy, earning it back requires more than luck. It requires the kind of persistence that's easier to maintain when you remember what it feels like to be useful. Mary disappears back into the flow of people moving through the market, and you watch her go with something that might be vicarious pride. Yesterday's coin, given when you could barely afford the generosity, has created something valuable, not just her temporary survival, but proof that even in the darkest circumstances, human kindness can multiply rather than simply diminish. Thomas rejoins you after conducting business of his own. Exactly what business, he doesn't specify, and you don't ask. Privacy is another luxury that becomes precious when you have nothing else to call your own. Everyone surviving on the streets has knowledge they can't share, connections they can't explain, sources of income that don't bear close examination. I heard something interesting, he says, as you begin walking again, your feet carrying you automatically toward areas where opportunity might present itself. Merchant heading south tomorrow, looking for men willing to travel, says there's work in the wool towns, better wages than anything here. This news deserves consideration. Travel means leaving behind the familiar geography of survival you've spent months learning, abandoning known resources for unknown possibilities. But it also means escaping whatever systematic threat claimed Henrik's life, distancing yourself from the professional killers who turn homelessness into opportunity for darker trades. What kind of work, you ask, though you suspect the specifics matter less than the chance to start fresh somewhere else. Loading mostly, moving bales from carts to warehouses. Hard work, but honest, and he's offering food and shelter during travel, in addition to wages. Thomas pauses, studying your face. Interested? The question hangs between you like morning mist, full of possibility and uncertainty in equal measure. Leave, and you abandon the carefully constructed survival strategies that have kept you alive for 8 months. Stay, and you remain vulnerable to whatever forces are systematically reducing the homeless population of this particular city. But beneath these practical considerations lies something deeper. The recognition that you've reached a crossroads where staying still might be more dangerous than moving forward. Henrik's death was a message, though exactly what message remains unclear. Perhaps it was simply bad luck, random violence in a world where violence is common. Perhaps it was something more deliberate, a warning to those who ask inconvenient questions about inconvenient disappearances. When does he leave, you ask, though part of you already knows the answer doesn't matter. Sometimes survival requires making decisions based on instinct rather than information, trusting the part of yourself that has learned to recognize danger even when that danger wears familiar faces. Dawn. From the south gate, says he'll take the first 6 men who show up ready to work and travel. Thomas meets your eyes directly. I'm going. This city's getting dangerous for people like us, and winter's coming besides. Better to face unknown problems than known ones. This logic is sound, though it requires abandoning the illusion of control that comes from familiar surroundings. Here, you know which guards are cruel and which are merely indifferent. You know which merchants might offer work and which doors might open to charity. You know where to find water, where to sleep safely, where to hide when hiding becomes necessary. But you also know that Henrik is dead, that professional killers are operating in the shadows, that winter approaches with its promise of turning discomfort into mortal danger. Knowledge and familiarity are valuable, but they're worthless if you don't survive to use them. Dawn, then, you say, and feel something shift in your chest. Not quite hope, but the absence of complete resignation. Southgate, Thomas nods, satisfied with your decision, but not surprised by it. In the world you both inhabit, staying in one place too long is often more dangerous than moving, even when movement means abandoning whatever small securities you've managed to construct. The afternoon stretches ahead with a different quality now that you've committed to leaving. Every familiar sight takes on the weight of farewell. The baker's shop where you've sheltered, the fountain where you met Mary, the market square where you've searched for work and found both kindness and indifference in equal measure. Your 3 coins feel heavier, weighted with the knowledge that they represent not just today's security, but tomorrow's uncertainty. Travel requires preparation, food that won't spoil, water for the road. Whatever supplies might make the difference between successful relocation and simply dying in a different place. But underneath the practical concerns runs something that might almost be excitement. The possibility that somewhere else, under different circumstances, you might reclaim some portion of the life that 8 months of homelessness have slowly eroded. It's a dangerous feeling, hope, but dangerous in the way that makes you want to take risks rather than avoid them. The cathedral bells mark another hour's passage, and you realize that by the time they ring tomorrow's dawn, you'll be on the road to somewhere else, carrying everything you own and trusting your survival to strangers whose promises might prove as ephemeral as morning frost. It's terrifying and liberating in equal measure. The prospect of starting over, of leaving behind not just this city's dangers, but its failures, its humiliations, its gradual erosion of everything you once believed about yourself and your place in the world. Tonight, you'll sleep one final time behind the baker's shop, pressed against stones that have provided what little comfort these months have offered. Tomorrow, you'll wake as a different person, not homeless William, but travelling William, man with purpose and destination, employee rather than vagrant. The transformation won't be real, of course. You'll still be the same person who lost everything 8 months ago, still carry the same vulnerabilities and fears and desperate hungers. But sometimes the illusion of change is enough to make actual change possible. And sometimes the simple act of moving forward creates its own momentum. Thomas has disappeared again, presumably making his own preparations for tomorrow's departure. You find yourself alone with the weight of decision and the strange lightness that comes from knowing you've reached the end of one chapter of survival and stand poised to begin another. The market continues its afternoon rhythm around you. Merchants and customers engaged in the ancient dance of commerce that you've watched from the margins for so many months. Tomorrow, you'll be gone from this place, and it will continue exactly as before. Proof of your fundamental irrelevance to its functioning, but also proof that other places exist where different possibilities might unfold. You begin walking toward the baker's shop, your feet following paths they've traced hundreds of times before. Tonight will be your last night sleeping rough in this city, your last night pressing against warm stones and listening for dangers in the darkness. Tomorrow will bring the road, with all its uncertainties and possibilities. For now, that's enough. The promise of change, the possibility of something better. The simple fact that you've survived long enough to face whatever comes next. The afternoon light slants through the narrow streets, casting long shadows that will soon give way to evening's familiar challenges. But tonight, those challenges feel different. Not the endless repetition of desperate survival, but the final notes of a song that's ready to end. By dawn, you'll be gone, carrying nothing but hope and determination toward whatever waits beyond the southern horizon. It might be better than what you're leaving behind. It might be worse. But it will be different, and sometimes different is all the victory that circumstances allow. You spend your final evening in the city like a ghost, revisiting the scenes of its former life. Every street corner carries memory now that you're leaving. Not good memories exactly, but the kind that form when survival becomes routine, and routine becomes something approaching familiarity. The light fades earlier than you expect, November asserting its dominance over the shortening days. Soon, winter will arrive in earnest, and you wonder if the wool towns Thomas mentioned will prove more hospitable to the desperate, or if cold is simply cold, regardless of geography. The thought follows you as you make your way through streets that will soon know you only as an absence. Near the cathedral, evening prayers have begun, and you pause to listen to the familiar cadence of voices raised in unison. There's something comforting about ritual, even when you exist outside its promises. The certainty of it, the way some things continue regardless of individual fortune or misfortune. Tomorrow, these same voices will rise in the same patterns, and you'll be miles away, listening to different bells mark different hours. A merchant passes with his cart, wheels creaking under the weight of goods bound for distant markets. You study his face, wondering if this might be the man offering work and travel, but he pays you no attention. In his eyes, you're just another shadow among shadows, another figure existing in the spaces between legitimate commerce and legitimate concern. The baker's wife appears in her doorway, sweeping the day's flour dust into the street with practiced efficiency. She's never spoken to you directly, but she's never called the watch either, which in the mathematics of survival represents a form of kindness. Her presence behind the shop has been one of the few constants in your shifting world. The sound of her broom each evening, the warm glow of her windows, the knowledge that her ovens would provide heat through the coldest hours. You want to thank her somehow, to acknowledge the small mercy of her indifference, but approaching would only create discomfort for both of you. Better to let sleeping arrangements lie undisturbed, to maintain the fiction that you were never really there at all. Instead, you settle into your familiar depression behind the building, arranging your body against stones that have become as familiar as old friends. The warmth isn't as strong tonight. The bakers must be conserving fuel as winter approaches, but it's still there, still enough to keep the worst of the cold at bay. Your 3 coins rest heavy in your palm, and you make mental calculations about tomorrow's needs. Food for the journey, certainly. Water, if you can manage it. Perhaps a small gift for the merchant as proof of good faith, though gifts given by the desperate often create more suspicion than gratitude. The city settles into its evening rhythm around you, but tonight that rhythm feels different. Doors closing don't just mark the end of another day, they mark the end of your connection to this place, your strange membership in its community of shadows and margins. Tomorrow, other desperate souls will compete for the opportunities you're abandoning. Will learn the routes you've mapped, will discover the kindnesses and cruelties you've catalogued through months of careful observation. Sleep comes in fragments, interrupted by the hypervigilance that has kept you alive through countless nights. But tonight, even your dreams feel temporary, as if your mind is already beginning to detach from this place, preparing for whatever lies beyond the southern gates. You wake before the cathedral bells ring prime, your body trained to recognize the subtle shift in darkness that precedes dawn. The stones beneath you have grown cold, their stored heat finally exhausted, but somehow you don't mind. Cold feels appropriate for departure, like nature's way of making leaving easier. Your possessions, such as they are, fit easily into your worn cloak, the knife in your boot, the flint and steel wrapped in oiled cloth, the spare shirt that's more patch than original fabric. Everything you own in the world, carried on your back like a snail's shell, portable and precious, because portability itself has become precious. The baker's apprentice hasn't arrived yet, which means you can slip away without awkward explanations or unwanted attention. You retrieve your hidden belongings for the final time, leaving behind the loose stone that served as your strongbox. Some other desperate soul will discover it eventually, will understand its purpose, and perhaps find their own use for its concealment. The streets are empty, except for cats and early servants. The city still wrapped in that peculiar hush that comes just before full awakening. Your footsteps echo softly on cobblestones worn smooth by centuries of passage, and you realize you'll miss this sound, the rhythm of your own movement through familiar spaces, the percussion of survival that has marked your days for 8 months. Thomas is already waiting at the south gate when you arrive, his few possessions arranged with the same careful economy that marks your own preparations. He nods greeting, but doesn't speak. Dawn conversations carry too easily in empty streets, and drawing attention to yourself on the morning of departure would be pointless bad luck. Other figures emerge from the pre-dawn shadows, men whose circumstances you recognize without need for explanation. Hollow cheeks, patched clothes, the particular wariness that comes from sleeping rough and eating little. Your competition for the merchant's offered work, but also your companions in whatever lies ahead. The merchant himself appears as the cathedral bells ring the first hour, leading a string of pack mules loaded with goods covered in oiled canvas. He's younger than you expected, with the kind of confident bearing that comes from success earned rather than inherited. His clothes are well made but practical, his boots sturdy enough for long roads, his manner suggesting someone who's learned to judge men quickly and accurately. 6 positions, he announces without preamble, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Food and shelter during travel, plus wages paid weekly. Work includes loading, unloading, guard duty if needed. Anyone not willing to pull his weight gets left at the next town with whatever wages he's earned. The terms are fair, which makes them suspicious. In your experience, fairness often comes with hidden costs, and generous offers usually contain traps that only become apparent after commitment has made escape impossible. But the alternative is staying, and staying means facing whatever claimed Henrik's life. Whatever systematic reduction of inconvenient populations continues in the shadows of familiar streets. One by one, the merchant examines each potential employee with the practiced eye of someone who's learned to read desperation, to distinguish between men who will work and men who will cause trouble. When his gaze reaches you, those calculating eyes take in your patched clothes, your hollow cheeks, the knife handle visible in your boot. Name, he asks, though names among the desperate are often negotiable. William, you answer, choosing to keep the identity that served you through these months of survival. Ever travelled the wool roads? No, sir. Ever worked with mules? With horses, sir. Some. He nods, apparently satisfied with your honesty about limitations, rather than impressed by false claims of expertise. You'll learn. Keep up, follow orders, don't steal, don't cause trouble. Understood? Understood. Thomas receives similar examination and approval, as do 3 others whose faces carry the same desperate hope that you recognize in your own reflection. One man is rejected. Too old, the merchant judges, though he doesn't elaborate on what criteria determine the cutoff between useful and burdensome. The rejected man accepts dismissal with the resigned dignity of someone who's grown accustomed to doors closing in his face. He shuffles back toward the city gates, and you wonder if he'll find other opportunities or simply fade into the winter like smoke from a dying fire. We leave now, the merchant announces, shouldering his pack with the efficient movement of someone who's done this countless times before. Walk steady, complain little, and remember that the road has its own rules. Break them, and you'll discover they're enforced differently than city laws. The pack train begins moving with the peculiar rhythm of mules and men finding their pace, hooves and boots creating a complex percussion on stone that gradually shifts to the softer sound of dirt roads as you pass beyond the city walls. Behind you, the familiar skyline grows smaller, the cathedral spire that marked your hours diminishing until it's just another vertical line in a landscape full of vertical lines. The road stretches ahead, brown and rutted, but heading south toward possibilities you can't yet envision. Your feet find the rhythm of long-distance walking, your body remembering skills from a previous life, when travel was choice rather than necessity. The merchants' mules plod forward with patient determination, their loads swaying gently as they navigate the uneven ground. Thomas walks beside you, maintaining the comfortable silence of men who understand that energy must be conserved for the long haul ahead. Around you, the other hired hands settle into their own patterns of movement and rest, each man carrying his private calculations about what this journey might bring. The sun climbs higher, burning away the morning's frost and revealing countryside that looks nothing like the cramped streets and narrow alleys you've called home for 8 months. Fields stretch toward distant hills, broken by stands of trees whose leaves have turned the colours of fire and gold. It's beautiful in a way that makes your chest tight with emotions you'd almost forgotten how to feel. For the first time in months, you're moving forward with purpose, rather than simply surviving from one hour to the next. Your feet carry you toward unknown destinations, but unknown feels better than the grinding familiarity of desperation barely held at bay. The road curves gently to follow the contours of the land, and with each step you feel the weight of the city's shadows lifting from your shoulders. Henrik's death, the professional killers, the systematic fear that had begun to poison even small victories, all of it falls behind like shed skin. You're still homeless, still desperate, still carrying everything you own in a bundle that wouldn't fill a merchant's smallest saddlebag, but you're moving, and movement creates its own form of hope. Whatever waits in the wool towns might be better than what you're leaving behind. It might be worse, but it will be different. And different has become another word for possibility. The merchant calls a brief halt near a crossroads marked by a weathered stone cross, and you use the respite to adjust your pack and study the faces of your travelling companions. They're men like yourself, displaced, desperate, but still capable of work, still hoping that circumstances might change if only they can find the right combination of effort and opportunity. One of them, a man whose greying beard suggests he's seen more winters than the rest, catches your eye and nods toward the road ahead. "Been this way before?" he says quietly. 3 days to the first wool town, maybe 4 if the weather turns. Good work there if you can get it. Fair masters, most of them. This intelligence is valuable, the kind of practical knowledge that makes the difference between successful relocation and simply starving in a different place. You file it away with the growing collection of information that might prove useful in whatever comes next. The merchant calls for the train to resume movement, and you fall back into the rhythm of walking, each step carrying you further from the familiar geography of survival you've spent months learning. The road ahead is uncertain, full of unknown challenges and unpredictable opportunities, but uncertainty, you're beginning to understand, might be preferable to the grinding certainty of gradual decline. At least uncertainty contains the possibility of improvement, the chance that tomorrow might be genuinely different from today, rather than simply another variation on the same theme of careful desperation. The sun continues its arc across the autumn sky, and you walk beneath it with something that might almost be called contentment. Not happiness. Happiness feels too large and dangerous for your current circumstances. but contentment, the simple satisfaction of forward movement, of purpose, however temporary, of hope, however fragile. Behind you, the city disappears entirely, swallowed by distance and the rolling contours of countryside. Ahead, the road continues its patient curve toward whatever waits beyond the southern horizon. You're no longer homeless, William, sleeping rough behind a baker's shop and competing for scraps of charity. You're travelling William, employed William, man with destination and purpose and wages promised for honest work. The transformation isn't real yet, but it feels possible in a way that seemed impossible just yesterday. And possibility, in the harsh mathematics of medieval survival, is worth more than silver, more precious than security, more valuable than all the careful strategies that kept you alive but couldn't help you truly live. The road stretches ahead, brown and patient and full of promise. Your feet find their rhythm. Your pack settles comfortably on your shoulders, and for the first time in 8 months, you're walking towards something rather than away from it. That distinction makes all the difference in the world. The afternoon light filters through bare branches overhead, creating shifting patterns on the road that remind you how far you've already come from the city's rigid geometry of stone and shadow. Your legs have found their rhythm now, the steady pace that experienced travelers know will carry them through long days, without burning energy better saved for tomorrow's miles. The merchant's name, you learn, is Edmund, and he proves to be a man of practical wisdom, rather than unnecessary conversation. He knows these roads like a priest knows prayers, understanding which villages welcome travelers, and which view strangers with suspicion, where clean water can be found, and where it's better to go thirsty than risk the flux. Thomas walks with the steady determination of someone who's made peace with his choice to leave everything familiar behind. The other men in your small company maintain the careful distance that strangers observe when thrown together by necessity rather than choice. Names are shared sparingly, personal histories not at all. This is wise. On the road, too much knowledge about your companions can become a burden if circumstances turn difficult. The countryside reveals itself slowly as you walk, each mile bringing subtle changes in the landscape that mark your progress away from everything you've known. The soil grows darker, richer, more suitable for the sheep that dot distant hillsides, like scattered clouds. These are the lands that feed the wool trade, where fortunes are made from the backs of animals, whose fleece will eventually become cloth fine enough for lords and ladies to wear. Edmund calls another halt as the sun begins its descent toward the western hills, and you realize with something approaching surprise that you've been walking for hours without the constant vigilance that marked your city existence. No watching for guards, no calculating the safest route between one temporary shelter and another, no measuring every step against the possibility of unwanted attention. The road has its own dangers, certainly, but they're different dangers. Bandits rather than professional killers. Wild animals rather than systematic elimination of inconvenient populations. These feel like risks you can understand, prepare for, face with some chance of success, rather than the shadowy threats that had begun to make the city feel like a trap, closing slowly around everyone who existed in its margins. "We'll camp here tonight," Edmund announces, indicating a grove of trees set back from the road where previous travellers have left the blackened stones of old fire circles. Water's good, shelter from wind, and we're far enough from the main route to avoid unwanted visitors. I.e., this is your first lesson in roadcraft, that experienced travellers know how to read landscape for the subtle signs that mark safe resting places. The grove offers everything Edmund promised. A small stream running clear and cold, trees positioned to break the worst of the night wind, and the kind of concealment that keeps honest travellers hidden from dishonest ones. The mules are unloaded with the efficient teamwork of men who understand that everyone's comfort depends on everyone's contribution. You find yourself working alongside Thomas to gather firewood, a task that feels almost luxurious after months of scavenging for any source of warmth. Here, fuel is abundant, and the fire you build will be shared rather than hoarded, maintained by agreement rather than guarded against theft. Edmund produces food from his packs, not feast, but better than anything you've eaten in recent memory. Hard bread, dried meat, cheese that's only slightly green around the edges, ale that tastes like it was brewed by someone who understood the craft. The portions are generous enough to quiet the constant hollow ache in your belly, and for the first time in months, you eat without calculating how to make food last until the next uncertain meal. The fire crackles to life as darkness settles over the countryside, creating a circle of warmth and light that feels like temporary sanctuary. Around it, 6 men who were strangers this morning begin the careful process of becoming traveling companions, sharing food and small observations about the day's journey without yet risking deeper revelations. One of them, the greying man who'd spoken of the wool towns, proves to have experience as a soldier before circumstances reduced him to seeking work on the roads. His knowledge of weapons and fighting techniques might prove valuable if the journey encounters the kind of trouble that makes merchants hire guards as well as labourers. Another has worked in stables and understands the care of animals, knowledge that earns him Edmund's approval and a slightly larger portion of the evening meal. The third keeps his own counsel, speaking little but working steadily, the kind of man who survives by making himself useful without making himself memorable. Thomas, you discover, has been on the roads before, though he doesn't elaborate on the circumstances that taught him to read weather signs and judge distances. His experience becomes valuable as night deepens and questions arise about watchers, about the sounds that mean danger and the ones that mean nothing more threatening than owls hunting mice. You contribute what knowledge you can, skills learned during your months of urban survival that translate surprisingly well to road life. How to sleep lightly while still getting rest, how to read the intentions in approaching footsteps, how to remain alert without appearing nervous. These talents, developed through necessity in city alleys, prove their worth around a campfire in open country. The conversation gradually dies as men settle into their blankets, each finding his own accommodation with the hard ground and the unfamiliar sounds of countryside night. You lie on your back, looking up through bare branches at stars that seem brighter and more numerous than they ever appeared from city streets. This is freedom of a sort, though not the kind poets write songs about. It's the freedom that comes from having nothing left to lose, from being so far outside society's protection that you're also outside its restrictions. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, but tonight you're warm, fed, and surrounded by men who share your circumstances rather than judging them. The fire settles into glowing coals, and someone begins snoring with the deep rhythm of exhaustion, finally given permission to rest. You close your eyes and let sleep come naturally, without the hypervigilance that marked your city nights. Here, under open sky with honest men around a dying fire, rest feels possible in ways it hasn't for months. Your dreams, when they come, are of roads stretching endlessly forward, of wool towns where work waits for willing hands, of possibilities that exist somewhere beyond the next hill or the one after that. For the first time since your world collapsed 8 months ago, the future feels like something that might hold promise, rather than merely the next variation on familiar desperation. Dawn comes with the sound of Edmund stirring the fire back to life, and you wake to find frost covering your blanket like scattered diamonds. The cold is sharp but clean, nothing like the damp chill that settled into your bones during those nights pressed against the baker's stones. This is honest cold, seasonal and temporary, the kind that retreat with sunrise, rather than lingering to sap strength throughout the day. The morning meal is simple but adequate. More bread, some dried fruit that Edmund produces from his seemingly endless supply of provisions, weak ale to wash away the taste of sleep. Around the fire, 6 men prepare for another day's walking with the efficient movements of people who've learned not to waste energy on unnecessary gestures. Your muscles protest slightly as you shoulder your pack, but it's the good ache of work rather than the persistent pain of malnutrition and poor shelter. The road stretches ahead through countryside that grows more prosperous with each mile, marked by better maintained walls, healthier livestock, and the kind of careful cultivation that speaks of communities with stable leadership and adequate resources. 2 days more to Woolhaven, Edmund announces as the small caravan forms up for departure. Good market town, fair magistrates, plenty of work for men willing to earn their keep. We'll rest there properly before pushing on to the larger centres. Woolhaven. Even the name carries promise, suggesting a place where the trade that will employ you has deep roots, where merchants understand the value of reliable workers and pay accordingly. It's not the destination of your dreams. You're not sure you remember how to dream of anything beyond survival, but it's a destination, which is more than you've had since leaving the city. The second day passes more easily than the first, your body adapting to the rhythm of long-distance walking, your mind settling into the peculiar peace that comes from having one simple task. Put one foot in front of the other, maintain the pace, reach the next rest stop. It's meditative in its way, this reduction of existence to its most basic elements. The countryside continues to reveal its prosperity as you walk. Sheep graze in fields where the grass is thick and green, despite the season's lateness, their fleeces heavy with the wool that will become your livelihood. Villages appear with increasing frequency, each one a small cluster of stone and timber buildings arranged around a market square where the business of the wool trade continues its ancient patterns. You pass other travellers on the road, merchants with their own pack trains, pilgrims heading toward distant shrines, messengers carrying letters between towns whose names you're only beginning to learn. The traffic suggests a region where commerce flows steadily, where opportunities exist for those willing to work, and where the kind of systematic elimination that claimed Henrik would be harder to conduct unnoticed. Thomas walks beside you with increasing confidence, his earlier wariness giving way to something that might almost be optimism. The road has been good to both of you so far. No bandits, no accidents, no unpleasant discoveries about Edmund's character or intentions. Sometimes, the simple absence of disaster feels like victory, and a victory, however small, creates momentum for larger victories. On the evening of the second day, as you make camp beside another stream in another grove of trees, Edmund gathers his hired men around the fire and speaks more directly than he has since departure. "Tomorrow we reach Woolhaven," he begins, his voice carrying the authority of someone who's learned to command attention without raising his volume. "I'll be conducting business there for several days, maybe a week. Those of you who want to continue with me to the larger towns are welcome, but I understand some might prefer to stay and seek local employment. This is decision time, the moment when temporary employment becomes choice about longer-term direction. Continue with Edmund toward unknown opportunities in larger towns, or stop in Woolhaven and try to build something more permanent from whatever work the local wool trade might offer. You find yourself weighing options that would have seemed impossible just days ago. The luxury of choice, even limited choice, feels almost overwhelming after months of having no options beyond daily survival. But choice, you're learning, is its own form of responsibility, the weight of deciding not just what to do next, but who to become in whatever comes after. The fire burns lower as men consider their futures in comfortable silence. Tomorrow will bring Woolhaven, with its promise of work and wages, and the possibility of rejoining the world of people who have places to sleep and reasons to wake up beyond the simple fact of being alive. For now, that's enough. Tomorrow's choices can wait for tomorrow's light. Tonight, you're warm, fed, and surrounded by the quiet companionship of men who understand that sometimes the greatest victory is simply continuing to move forward when everything familiar has been left behind. The stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns, and you fall asleep to the sound of wind in bare branches and the soft breathing of honest men sharing honest rest. Whatever waits in Woolhaven, whatever choices tomorrow demands, You'll meet them with strength earned through survival and hope earned through the simple act of refusing to surrender. The road has carried you this far. Tomorrow, it will carry you home.